0421 hours, May 21st, 2545 military calendar. Edge of the Acarnania system, heading to the colony of Actium. On board UNSC Edinburgh. Staff Sergeant Marcus Black and Sergeant J. Denton knocked their helmets together, then pulled them over their heads, sealing them in place, completing their matte black ODST battle armour. Their visors polarised to silver, and they climbed into their respective drop pods. The ODSTs were special forces within the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC. Nicknamed Helljumpers due to their unique entry method into the battlefield, they would climb into a single-occupant insertion pod that would be literally dropped from the belly of a ship, and they would freefall feet first through the heat and flames of re-entry into an atmosphere and land hard planet-side, usually behind enemy lines, to divide and conquer. It was completely voluntary outfit due to the risk involved, as often ODSTs would die before even making it into battle. To be an ODST, you had to be a particular kind of crazy. The training had brutality and ruthlessness in spades. Many would drop out and be returned to post, a mark of great shame within the ODSTs, and many more would be injured beyond being able to continue participation. But it was also the best chance you had to get up close and personal with the Covenant, and able to take the fight to them directly. For the past 26 minutes, they had been suiting up and loading their gear into their drop pods, as per the orders of their CO, Major Van Coller, while the UNSC Edinburgh performed a quick intra-system slipspace jump from the edge of the solar system to orbit around Actium. Now nearing their destination, it was time to load up. The loud klaxon and red lights had begun wailing, and the 216 ODSTs on board climbed into their pods and sealed the hatches. Jay's heads-up display activated and loaded up. His comms gear activated and gained encrypted access to his Fireteam's comms. Fireteam Ares, comcheck. Marcos's serious tone came over the helmet speakers, slipping into his combat mindset. Reading you 5x5, Jay responded. Loud and clear, Hamish's voice called back. Crystal boss, Mitch excitedly replied. Kyra finished, online. So what's the plan when we get down there, Mitch asked. Hit and run and gun and we get the point, man, Hamish interrupted in his broad South African accent. The plan? Don't shoot yourself on the way down. Don't dig your own grave when you get there. Don't get shafted before getting out of your pod. Don't get shot, Kyra replied in true American to-the-point fashion. Mitch paused, then jokingly replied, so the only thing I'm allowed to do is die. Yeah, as long as you walk it off and get back on task, Jay joked. When we touch down, find some cover, get your bearings, check in with each other, then we move from there. Planning for anything during the chaos doesn't make any sense. That's the plan. Understood? Marcos replied. Mitch then overexcitedly replied, then let's get it on. Across the gantry, Jay could see the drop pod containing Mitch wobbling in its cradle. Mitch was the joker of the Fireteam, an odd combination given that he was also the medic, but the comic relief had helped alleviate some of the stress of getting injured in the past, but sometimes he could get a little over the top. He was the typical good-looking doctor type, average height and build, but short-cropped styled blonde hair, blue eyes, strong jawline and cheekbones, naturally charismatic and somewhat eccentric. He was lunging around inside his pod, making it look as if he were trying to wobble the pod loose and drop early. This was impossible due to the cradle's locking mechanism failsafes, and more importantly, the fact that the drop bay doors were still closed because they were in slip space. But the fact he was trying meant he wasn't strapped in, and was letting his excitement get the better of him. Marcos could evidently see this too, and took that moment to rein it back in. Corporal Hayes, put your goddamn harness on and stop pissing around unless you want to be pasted on the ceiling of your pod. Mitch quickly stopped and strapped himself in. Marcos waited a few moments and then asked for final confirmation of ready from his Fireteam. Acknowledgement lights winked in response on Marcos's HOD. Take it easy on Mitch. You know he's just trying to ease the tension, Jay started, opening a private comm link to Marcos. Which is fine, but I also need him focused, Marcos replied. Jay could hear the tension in Marcos's voice. They'd been mates since they were kids and knew him better than anyone, currently living at least. So he knew when he was pent up about something. You good? Jay asked. Yeah, just... Marcos paused, pushing aside the feeling in his gut. Yeah, I'm fine. Jay knew this was a lie. He knew Marcos was thinking about the mission ahead and how it seemed like really long odds, even for ODSTs. So rather than call him on it, he feigned concern himself. Seriously though, what is the plan? Jay continued. Don't get me wrong, I'm up for inserting then filling them all with lead, but we are just a distraction for the 53rd. Kind of feel like we're being hung out to dry. It's not ideal, but we'll make it work. Trust me, Marcos's voice replied in a marginally softened, reassuring manner. That was the opposite effect that Jay wanted, but before he could reply, the comms opened. Helljumpers, Captain Roberts' voice came over the comms. We are exiting slipspace in 30 seconds, ready for deployment. You heard it, Major Van Coller called out in his gruff British accent. Prepare for drop. Oorah, all 216 ODSTs chanted. He was the ranking officer of this particular ODST attachment. Career military and native of Actium, his accent denoted a privileged upbringing on the prosperous world of Actium, on the borders of the inner and outer colonies. It was this very location which made Actium particularly unique and thus a desirable colony to live on. Actium was in the prime position of being a main industrial and commercial conduit between the inner and outer colonies. This enabled Actium, despite being one of the newer colonies, to also be one of the most prosperous. Van Coller's parents had settled in Actium and intended on him attending the best schools and taking over the family business tycoon in advanced xenobiological engineering. But he was a fighter, and after doing just enough to get by in those schools, he waited for his 18th birthday to enlist in the UNSC. His parents didn't approve of his chosen work, but he couldn't ignore who he was, a point which his fellow Marines appreciated above all else. Fireteam Orpheus and I are leading up Alpha Unit. We're cutting down to the south. Fireteam Ares, you're leading up Bravo Unit. Punch through their centre. Fireteam Zealous, you've got Charlie Unit. Adjust your vector due north. See if you can't soften them up at range, Van Coller ordered. A private line opened to Fireteam Ares a moment later. Do not give Fireteam Dolos a hard time, understood? Van Coller asked. Jay felt a pang of irritation at his words. As long as they keep their sights on the coveys and not understood, sir. Marcus interrupted Jay. Good, Van Coller replied. Come on, man, you know as well as I do that they're innies, Jay bit over the private comm. Yeah, I do. But the brass either don't know or don't care. No good making a big song and dance if nothing's going to be done about it. Just keep one eye on them and the other on the coveys. How the hell you suppose I do that? You might be able to go all boss-eyed, but I'm too pretty to risk it. What if the wind changes? You dick, Marcus replied. Marcus, Jamie, Hamish, Mitch and Kyra battled through ODST training together. They had met in boot camp for the ODSTs and quickly developed a close-knit team. Marcos and Jay had joined the colonial militia on Colo when they were younger and moved to the Marines before they were ODSTs. Marcos was of athletic build and stood at 6'5". His brown hair cropped short at the back and sides, fading to a well-kept beard and a well-defined jawline, and slightly messily styled on top. His hazel eyes were framed by a naturally well-defined and slightly angular furrowed brow, giving him what Jay referred to as resting bitch face, a stern and stoic expression, even when he was actually quite content. He had an energetic and live wire personality when he was a younger man, but something about the war had hardened him somewhat. Jay, a shorter but stockier, more well-built man, at 5'7", stubbly hair, clean-shaven with electric blue eyes. Nothing had dulled his naturally aggressive and short-tempered personality. If anything, he'd been defined by it, a trait which often got him into trouble when not engaged in battle, but had single-handedly saved him and his fireteam in the thick of war on more than one occasion, and as such, hadn't been taught out of him by Marcos, or their commanding officers. Mitch had trained as a surgeon and lived on Harvest before it was attacked by the Covenant. He had managed to evacuate before things got ugly, but his family weren't so lucky. He dealt with the loss by overcompensating with humour. He signed up to the UNSC and trained as a medic. When he got a taste for the chaos of the battlefield, he decided the ODSTs was the best place to get the chaos and the need for medical support in equal doses, and he's never looked back. Hamish was also from Harvest, and had once been a man content with non-confrontational, peaceful life afforded by living on an agricultural colony. As a 6'2", slim redhead with dreadlocks, he certainly stood out in a crowd, but with a modest and quiet temperament, offset by occasional predisposition to joke in various accents, aside from his natural South African accent, to the point that he had the entire fireteam in fits of laughter. Unfortunately, in a scenario now all too common across the surviving people of glass planets, he had lost everyone and everything he ever cared for. As a refugee made homeless by the war with the Covenant, he had little other option than to enlist in the UNSC, eventually meeting with the other members of Fireteam Ares. Kyra came from Irandus II, a world that was particularly plagued with insurrectionist activity. By no means was her home a criminal cesspit, but it was certainly a harder place to live than most. This had conditioned her strictly no-mess character. A brunette with shoulder-length hair she kept up in a tight bun, attractively angular features, but at 5'2" was the least physically imposing of the team. But she more than made up for it in her attitude and her ability to carry herself without incident, due to the rougher parts of Eridanus II. The highly militarized and prosperous inner colonies had created something of a class divide between the inner and outer colonies. As a result, some of the outer colonies wanted the right to secede from the United Earth government and become independent worlds in their own right, something the UEG wasn't keen on entertaining the idea of. It didn't take long for extremist protesters to rise up against the militarized enforcement of the UEG, and so the United Rebel Front was born. Conflicts raged between the UNSC and the insurrectionist groups for decades before the arrival of the Covenant, and their desire to wipe all of humanity, UNSC or Rebel, from the galaxy presented both groups with a common enemy. As the number of glass colonies grew, so did the influx of displaced ex-Rebel combatants into the UNSC. Kyra knew of a few groups on Eridanus II which had strong ties to the United Rebel Front, and when she joined the ODSTs, it didn't take long until she recognised some faces that she knew were bad news. Fireteam Dolos were just such a group of ex-Rebel soldiers now part of the UNSC, and there were more than a few incidents between Fireteam Ares and Dolos on exactly that subject. After graduation from ODST training, one particular incident involved the accidental misfiring of Dolos's weapons at Fireteam Ares. In a case of mistaken identity-friendly fire, and the conveniently corrupted helmet cam footage that meant that they got away with it, Fireteam Ares didn't let that slip and managed to even the score, involving 3 broken limbs, a gashed forehead, and a few dented egos, all on the part of Fireteam Dolos, with the exception of the dented egos, which involved Kyra kicking Marcos, Jamie and Hamish's asses for pulling her into a fight she would have rather not been involved with. Mitch was too busy eating to notice. Fireteam Ares were disciplined severely for that particular incident, but narrowly avoided court-martial thanks in no small part to the favour earned to them from Major Van Collar. They were dispatched into many small engagements after that and have since kept a close eye on Fireteam Dolos, a point which had caused more than a little friction and drawn Van Collar's attention more than he'd care to mention. The pre-mission jitters intensified in Jay's blood, his adrenaline spiked in anticipation for the fight, and he slowed his breathing to get his vitals back under control. The ship lurched as it exited slip space, and outside his pod's hatch, the drop bays came to life. The rows of drop pods on their securing armatures pulled backwards away from the gantries and walkways, rotating 180 degrees, then dropped 3 stories into position. Below, the drop bay doors opened, revealing the upper atmosphere of Actium below. "A little out of position and we have some heavy inbound. Hang on down there, troopers," Robert's voice spoke over their comms. The ship lurched again as the captain brought the main drives to full power. Actium began rolling beneath them as the ship accelerated. A few purple streaks dashed by the drop bay doors. Seraph fighters were engaging the Edinburgh. Dark wreckages from other UNSC ships came into view, their shattered hulls and exposed superstructure silhouetted against Actium's glowing atmosphere, like the half-eaten carcasses of oddly angular whales floating in a sea of infinite dark and twinkling starlight. The ship suddenly started rolling. Actium disappeared from the view as the Edinburgh turned its belly towards the stars. Harsh white sunlight beamed briefly into the drop bay, and then back to the endless empty of deep space, right before the looming silver-purple hull of a Covenant assault carrier came into view. It fired 2 of its plasma cannons, but the Edinburgh had been expertly rolled to avoid the incoming fire. The stars continued to roll past as the ship's belly came back around to facing Actium. The primer lights in Jay's drop pod glowed bright orange, then quickly sequenced through to green. A brief feeling of vertigo was followed by a jarring acceleration as his and the 215 other pods in the drop bay were released and began their descent. Out of his hatch, he could see only a portion of the other pods as they rocketed towards the upper atmosphere. A few pods accelerated past his, more than likely holding the LTs, part of the long-standing tradition that the commanding officers must be the first into battle. Below, Actium quickly grew until it occupied most of what he could see. Red flames exploded up past the glass of his viewport as he punched through the upper atmosphere. The temperature in the pod spiked to an unbearable temperature before his ODST battle armor compensated and began cooling his body. Even then, it felt like standing naked directly in front of a furnace. After a few more moments, the temperature dropped as the heat of re-entry dissipated. The clouds below quickly rose as Jay heard a clunk above his head and suddenly had his body compressed by a jarring deceleration. The pod's main windbreak chute had deployed and lurched as the pod dropped to subsonic speeds, joined by a muffled sonic boom. Now being shaken aggressively as the air brakes cut through the turbulent air above the pod, Jay's adrenaline spiked again as he prepared for combat. Another lurch shook as the chute cut away and thrusters fired to slow his fall further. Outside the viewport, the crater came into view, filled to the brim with a thick fog, with two battle cruisers floating ominously like two massive sharks poised to attack, their respective gravity lifts painting the upper fog in a purple glow. Even through the fog, Jay could see the glowing neon purples and blues of the Covenant plasma-based technology. From his narrow view, a few of the ODST pods were wide and were heading directly for one of the cruisers. Jay didn't want to look, but couldn't look away, as 8 small flashes of light indicate the moment their pods impacted the upper hull of the cruisers and punched through. Drop pods were hardened against orbital insertion, so it was possible the ODSTs inside were okay, but lodged somewhere deep inside the ship. But it wasn't a certainty. "Looks like the cruiser's shields are down," Jay informed as the thrusters of his pod angled and rotated his pod so he was now facing away from the Covenant forces and towards the rim of the crater. In a split second, the cruisers passed from his viewport, followed by the crater rim. The view suddenly got foggy, and then his pod smashed into the ground so hard Jay felt every vertebrae in his spine press against each other. There was a moment pause before his pod shone a warning light. The explosive bolts in the pod's hatch detonated, and the entire hatch blew off the pod. Jay wrapped his fingers around the edge of the open hatch and pulled himself out of the pod. Plasma weapon projectiles now filled the air around him, and his only area of cover was being provided by his own drop pod. He grabbed his sidearm and holstered it, and then grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades and attached them to his ammo belt, which currently held additional 8-gauge shotgun shells. Finally, he grabbed his fully loaded shotgun from the drop pod, flicked the safety off, and racked the pump. "Fireteam Ares, check in," ordered the voice of Staff Sergeant Black over comms. "Heavy inbound, but we're ready to go," Kara called back. "I'm here," Jay replied. "All good here, Sarge," Mitch replied. "It's a shitstorm here. Fog is pretty thick. Where are you guys?" Hamish responded. "Activating IFF waypoints. We're on the eastern edge," Marcos replied as waypoints showing their respective locations popped up onto their HUDs. "Jay, you're about 14 meters from my position due east. Mitch, you're 63 meters due west, towards the center. Fall back to us and keep your head down. Kyra, get across to me. I'll cover you." Gunfire briefly filled the comms. "Hamish, you're half a click from my position due north-northeast. We'll come to you. Jay, get over here." Hamish interrupted. "Negative. You guys hold position. I'm further up the crater edge. I think I can get some high ground from here and give you guys some long-range cover. I didn't bring this 50 cal to pull the ladies. I got a smart scope. I should be able to watch your backs even through this fog." "Confirmed. Give 'em hell." "Bravo unit, form up," Marcos replied. "Jay, where the hell are you?" "Improvising," Jay shouted, a gritty response as he pushed against his drop pod. The inbound plasma fire was too thick to risk running even the 14-meter distance to Marcos and Kyra's position. Jay was attempting to rock his pod over onto its side. It was budging slightly, but he didn't have a great leverage point. He backed up 4 meters, staying within the limited cover of his pod, then ran and jumped. He slammed into the upper area of his drop pod, which rocked it enough forward for its tipping weight to take over. He slid down the side of the pod as it rolled forwards, laying itself on its side. 5 blue plasma bolts splashed over the edge of his pod, heating the metal to a dull cherry glow. Jay kept low for a few moments. Every drop pod has an emergency thruster reserve in case the pod lands in an undesirable position, so it can be quickly relocated. On this occasion, Jay was looking to use it as a battering ram. Jay took a breath and then stood quickly and primed the drop pod's emergency thrusters and then dropped back for cover. The pod's thrusters fired, briefly covering him in dirt and exhaust as the pods suddenly accelerated along the ground into the Covenant forces advancing on their position. Jay took the moment of distraction that caused to sprint towards Marcos and Kyra. He passed other ODSTs who had seen what he had done and were now trying to do the same thing. He skidded into cover next to Marcos and Kyra. Kyra punched him in the shoulder in excitement. "Ha! Nice!" Around them, over a dozen pods were now being sent rocketing into the advancing Covenant forces, 500-kilogram projectiles wiping out any poor SOBs unlucky enough to be stood in the way. A few moments later, some 40 rocket-propelled grenades lanced out from a contingent of explosive ordnance ODSTs to their rear and cleared a massive area of hostiles in a near-singular, massive explosion, giving them a bit of breathing room. Mitch appeared around a rock outcropping ahead of them and ran side-on to shoot at something further forward. He fired a few bursts, then turned and ducked into cover with the rest of them. "I've softened them up for you," Mitch smiled. "The fog is going to give us a bit of cover, but it's also going to make target identification harder. Troopers, be advised, 53rd are on the move. Keep them distracted a little longer for us," the voice of Menteith spoke over the local comms net. Colonel Menteith was the commanding officer on Actium and was leading the entire 53rd Armoured Division to the Covenant staging area within the crater. The crater was massive and contained 3 separate staging points with hostile troops and vehicles numbering in the tens of thousands. Menteith needed the ODSTs to draw some attention while the 53rd slipped into the crater through 2 very narrow choke points. Once through, they could rally together and put up a sizable offensive, but without a distraction they'd be wiped out before passing the rim. "Right, we have some breathing room here, let's make the most of it," Van Collar ordered. "Bravo unit, move forward, staggered line," Marcos ordered. Fireteam Ares minus Hamish shared a brief glance amongst themselves, readied their weapons and rounded their cover, sighting downrange. The area ahead of them was a mess, with over a dozen drop pods further into the crater at the end of long, charred and bloody lines of their adjustment burns. Further out, a large void filled with the twisted and broken carcasses of the Covenant unlucky enough to be hit with a massive volley of RPGs. The crater was littered with sharp, rocky outcrops, all leaning at hard angles away from the centre, in a broken but concentric ring around the inner half of the crater. They would provide ample cover if they could get out to them before the Covenant mounted a coordinated retaliation. That was looking ever more likely as the mass of Covenant troops started regrouping, gradually advancing through the fog, directing their collective attention to the human intruders. The 2 ships above were only visible by the glowing lights and plasma conduits on their underbellies shining through the fog. The 70-odd ODSTs in the immediate area began moving forward together in staggered formation, firing into the ranks of Covenant troops now moving towards their position. To his left and right, Jay could see troopers get hit and fall, while the rest of them kept moving forward, dodging what they could, and trying to see deeper into the fog than the advancing coveys could. "Fireteam Ares, tighten up," Marcos ordered. They pulled into a loose V formation and kept moving forward, firing as they went. The Covenant troops closed on their advancing line, and from the horde, an 8-foot saurian creature in red armour emerged, wielding an energy blade. Humans called them elites, and for a very good reason. They were veteran warriors and the military might of the Covenant. The huge creature lunged forward with surprising speed, and in moments closed on Fireteam Ares. Jay stepped past Marcos, suddenly leading their loose V formation, raised his shotgun, levelled with the elite's helmet, and squeezed the trigger. A bright flash of light immediately accompanied by a splatter of purple blood confirmed he hit his target. The elite's 4 mandibles had just been blown off completely, and a massive hole had been bored into its elongated skull. The elite fell limp in the air, momentum carrying his body past Jay and impacting the floor to the Team 6. Without breaking stride, they resumed their forward motion, adjusting their aim and killing whatever stood in front of them, dodging incoming fire as best they could and returning fire as fast and as accurate as they could manage. A few glancing plasma rounds clipped at the edges of their matte black armour, warming the plates slightly, but otherwise leaving them unharmed. A small phalanx of Covenant scouts were grouping ahead and readying to put up a fight. Above his head, the zipping crack of 4 quick-succession 50 cal rounds sounded, and 4 of the 6 jackals near exploded in a fountain of purple blood and a flash of their energy shield gauntlets disactivating. Hamish was watching their backs. Around them, the other ODSTs were firing in every direction, trying to thin the herd of Covenant troops engaging them while they advanced to the ring of rock outcrops, now just ahead. Kyra took a green plasma round directly to the chest. She winced to the intense heat, but her armour's refractive coating was designed to dissipate the heat from directed energy weapons. After a few brief seconds of discomfort, she regained her footing and kept up with the others, as they finally got to the rocky outcrops. "Did you see that up ahead?" Jay asked. "Yeah, we have some enemy armour. We aren't going to hang around here for very long," Mitch said. "Local units, be advised, we have enemy armour in the field. Keep an eye out for incoming mortar," Marcos called out over comms. Mitch moved over to Kyra, who was currently gripping the armor plate on her chest. "You hit?" "Nah, just blisters," she grimaced. "I'm good." Mitch nodded and glanced around the jagged rock. "Those wraiths are paying us some attention." Before Mitch could get out another word, the wraiths launched a volley of plasma mortar rounds that screamed up into the air in arcing lines and hurtled back towards their position. "Mortars inbound," someone shouted over comms. Fireteam Ares huddled close to their rocky cover and felt a sudden wave of immense heat and a powerful shudder through the rock. A mortar round had impacted the other side of their cover and turned it to molten glass, but had otherwise saved their lives. But more mortars were falling around their position, and over the sounds of the plasma rounds detonating, they could hear the screams of fellow ODSTs as they got hit. One mortar impacted the ground 10 meters to their left, directly where 7 other ODSTs were stood. In a bright white flash, the ODSTs disappeared, and when the residual plasma had subsided, a smooth, glassy, blackened crater was all that was left. The wraiths readied a second volley, but their positions were suddenly peppered with high-velocity rounds. The 53rd were in position, and their Cobras were firing on the wraiths. The Cobras had 2 30mm railguns on a rotating hub that could rapidly fire solid ferrous armor-piercing projectiles at supersonic speeds, and they were completely tearing up the wraiths' purple armoured hulls like they were tissue paper. Bright blue plasma arcs erupted from half a dozen of the wraiths before the others pivoted on their anti-gravity boosters, and then fired large boiling blue-white plasma mortar rounds back towards the Cobras. A large wailing hum began to fill the air as the 2 battle cruisers above them began charging their plasma batteries. "Cobras, the cruisers are charging their batteries. Brace for heavy inbound," an unnamed voice shouted over local comms. The battle cruisers' plasma batteries began glowing, ever more intense blue. The heat the plasma was radiating began dissolving the thick fog resting in the crater. "Those guns are boiling off the fog. We're going to lose our element of surprise here," Kyra said. The wailing sound of the charging plasma batteries grew to a mind-numbing level before the guns began spitting lances of plasma towards the 53rd's position. In seconds, the remaining fog in the area disappeared as the heat from the plasma lances flash-dried the air. For a brief moment, Marcos could see the entire expanse of the crater to see the advancing friendly armour. Suddenly everything in the crater was acutely visible. The area the 53rd were holding was obscured by clouds of smoke, dust and fire as the cruisers continued to fire on their advancing lines. Suddenly the hull on one side of one of the battle cruisers exploded outwards. To the south, 3 UNSC frigates had entered the atmosphere and were firing their magnetic accelerator cannons at the cruisers holding position above the crater. The cruiser that had been critically hit began listing aggressively to the north. The frigates flew over and began a wide arc to come back for a second pass on the cruisers. The cruiser fired its main ventral beam and burned the frigates out of the sky like flies to a zapper. The damaged cruiser continued listing, became unstable, its anti-gravity systems failing, and smashed into the surface of Actium some 200 meters north of the crater's edge. The wide ship then coming to rest with its splintered hull hanging over the crater's edge and leaking plasma over the northern lip. "Hamish, status," Marcus ordered, remembering his position wasn't far from the downed ship. "I'm okay, moving towards your position. Good that ship is down, but it started spewing plasma all over the place. A lot of our guys..." Hamish's voice paused. "53rd taken heavy casualties, but we're still operational. Pushing to the objective. Troopers, thanks for the assistance. We've got it from here," informed Colonel Menteith. Marcos paused, feeling as if they'd only fought half of a fight. "Colonel Menteith, this is Major Van Coller. We are ready and willing to continue to draw them." "Negative, there are too many of them, but we have the armour to at least make it to our objective. One way or another, we're ending this. We got this. The 2 concentrations of coveys to the south and north are beginning to converge on our position. Now the fog isn't obscuring their view. Just do us the favour of softening them up as you fall back. The longer you guys wait around, the less of a chance you have of getting clear. Move now, troopers." "All right, fellas," Van Coller called. "You heard the man. Soften them up. Danger close." Collectively, the remaining ODSTs responded to the order, sending a mix of rockets, grenades, heavy caliber weapons, and another volley of RPGs into the Covenant forces. The entire crater was briefly lit up by the collective detonation of all the ordnance the ODSTs just poured into the area. After the initial flash cleared, the ambient heat spiked, and the entire area, save for the 53rd's positions, seemed to nearly erupt into an explosion of fire that the crater hadn't seen since its original creation. The collective blast rippled outwards, knocking some ODSTs off their feet, kicking up dust and dirt, racing up the sides of the crater's rim and up into the atmosphere. As the blast subsided and the dust cleared, nearly a third of the Covenant forces had been completely obliterated. The ODSTs chanted a celebration before turning to begin their fallback maneuver. Menteith gleefully responded to the firepower just rained down upon the Covenant forces. Outstanding work, troopers. That's given us the room we need to deliver the package to the objective. Van Coller queried. Package, sir? Menteith confirmed. Affirmative, we have 2 Havoc nukes at our disposal, and plan on using them. Best get clear, boys and girls. It won't take long for the Coveys to come to their senses. Hamish, get clear and meet us at RV Point Bravo. Do not wait for us. Move. Marcos turned to the others. Fireteam Ares, on me. Thanks for listening. This was actually an excerpt from a fan fiction that I started writing quite a few years ago based in the Halo universe. There is a lot more available of this, and if you guys are into it, if you're enjoying it, then I may upload more, so let me know in the comments down below. As always, massive thanks to all of my patrons. Be sure to like, subscribe and hit the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to follow us on all major social media platforms including Discord. If you really love the channel and you like what I'm doing here, then pop over to Patreon and support the channel over there. It would mean the world to me. It would free up more of my time for me to put into this kind of content and other Halo related goodness. Take it easy guys, and find peace in the domain.